Well, good afternoon. How's everybody doing? All right. One more win. One more. One more. And we are world champions. I'm just so excited about that. And if you're here, this is your first time and you're like, who is that guy? Yeah, they let me be the pastor. It's amazing. And you're thinking, well, he doesn't look like one. That's awesome. Because we are just a group of normal people like you who are just trying to figure this thing called life out. We really want a life that matters, and so we're inviting people into that. And here's the great news. We don't think we have it all figured out, and we don't think we're perfect. We're just trying to do it together. And so thank you for being a part of this family, and I hope that you felt that as we've celebrated here today. And if we can serve you in any way, please do not hesitate to just find someone with a blue shirt, and we will definitely do our very best. And if you're watching online from wherever you are around the world, thank you so much. Yes, we are excited about our Toronto Raptors because they're going to make history tomorrow night, and you heard it here first. Anyway, wherever you're at, we would love to hear from you and where you're watching from. And if we can serve you as well, please do not hesitate to interact with our online pastor, and we will do our very best. Well, we are really glad that you are here, and we are in a series entitled Unlikely Heroes. And again, we call them unlikely heroes because we're going to learn that in this series, there are Bible heroes who I know if you grew up in Sunday school, feel like the feats and the things that they did were unattainable. And yet what we're going to learn is that they were just normal people who just said yes to a big dream that God had given them. And that made them unlikely heroes. And the great news is that you can be a hero too. Like that's the best part about this whole thing. And so today, we're going to talk about Joseph. Last week, we talked about Abraham, and we learned that if you want to experience all that you were created for, it's going to mean that sometimes you're going to have to move from where you are to where you should be. There has to come a moment in your life of awareness that, hey, there's got to be more than this, and you've got to take one step, even if it's just one step toward the next, the greater, the better, the life that God has called you to. And today we're going to talk about Joseph. So I'm going to try to summarize the story. It's a very large story. It's found in the Bible, in the very first book of the Bible, and it takes up Genesis 37 to 50. So it's, 13 solid chapters there. And so what I'm going to encourage you to do is read it this week. So if you're here and you don't have a Bible, we'd love to give you one. Just go to the great big blue wall. We'll give you one. If you're watching online, just let us know where you're watching from. We'll send you one. Or, even better, download the YouVersion app. Here's the great thing. You're like, well, I'm not a reader. Awesome. It will read to you. This is the best part. While you're driving around, you can hear the story of Joseph. And I hope today I'll give you a framework that will help you move from the pain you've experienced in your life to the purpose of your life. That's really big. How do you move from the pain in your life that we've all experienced in various forms into a purpose for our life? That's the story of Joseph. So here it is in summary, and I hope that you read it for yourself this week, and this framework will give you ways to interact with the story because that's the way it's meant to be done. So, a long, long time ago, in a wilderness far away. No, it was in the ancient world, in a nation that was about to become Israel. It was in the Middle East. There was a group of shepherds. And they were nomadic, so basically they lived in tents and they wandered from pasture to pasture in order to take care of their sheep. And the head of this tribe was a man by the name of Jacob. And he had 12 sons. His 11th son was a man by the name of, or a boy named Joseph. And Joseph was his favorite son because he was born to his second wife, and he loved him more than all of his brothers. And if you know anything about siblings, this causes some family tension. You're not allowed to have favorites, but Jacob had a favorite, and his name was Joseph. He actually pointed out Joseph one day by giving Joseph an amazing Technicolor dream coat. And in this coat, there was more than just a colorful coat. It was actually an expression. In the ancient world, just like crowns and signet rings for us symbolized power and authority, robes symbolized power and authority. So when Jacob gave Joseph, his favorite son, a robe, signifying that when he would pass on, Joseph would inherit everything, Reuben, the oldest brother, the rightful heir, was a little bit ticked off along with 10 brothers who were in front. So this caused a lot of tension. Added to that, Joseph one day had a dream, and in his dream, he had two of them. In both of them, his brothers and his father bowed down to him. Not great for family conflict. And Joseph was a bit young, 17 years old, and maybe not as wise as he should have been, decided one day to tell all of his brothers, hey, just so you know, one day you're going to bow to me. Well, this didn't go over very well, and so one day when Joseph was sent by his father, his favorite, to find his brothers, probably to tell them what they should or should not be doing, the brothers saw him coming and they decided to take the opportunity. What do you do when you get the opportunity to pay back somebody for a grudge or a hardship or a misunderstanding? Well, they decide to throw him in a pit. They take his coat off and they push the little punk kid into a hole and they leave him there to rot as they argue about how best to kill him. How much must you hate somebody to think about killing them when they're your brother? Now, fortunately for Joseph, or unfortunately, depending on how you read the story, a group of slave traders happened to be passing by, and one of his brothers, Judah, decided to take the opportunity to try to save his brother's life. And he said to his brothers, hey, if we just kill this kid, we're not going to get anything for it. So why don't we at least make some money? And so they do. They sell him. I don't know how that works. I don't know when you get to decide to sell somebody, but the slave traders buy him for some money. And then they try to figure out how to cover their sin. They decide, how are we going to tell our dad? So they take his coat, his beautiful, amazing Technicolor dream coat. They dip it in sheep's blood, and they bring it to their father, Jacob, and they say, we found this coat. It looks like Joseph was killed by a wild beast, and his father's heart is broken. Meanwhile, Joseph is taken to Egypt. And while in Egypt, he's sold into a household of a very powerful man by the name of Potiphar. Potiphar was incredibly wealthy and influential and affluent, and soon recognized in Joseph some of these leadership traits that Joseph inherently knew. And so he puts him in charge of his whole household. He was so impressed with him that he entrusted him with everything except one thing, his wife. But Potiphar's wife also noticed that Joseph had some fine attributes, and so she decided that those attributes needed to be expressed with her. And so day after day, she begged him to come to bed with her. What do you do when your life is unfair and an opportunity to do something avails itself to you? In a place that nobody knows, no one will care. You think to yourself, God has abandoned me, my family has abandoned me. What difference does it make? In that moment, Joseph realizes that you can let your circumstance define you or your character define you. And Joseph chooses his character. And he says to her, I can't do this against my master, and more than that, I can't do it against my conscience because I can't do it against God. This enrages her, and as he's trying to run away from her, she grabs his coat and uses this as an opportunity to falsely accuse him of trying to rape her. And so she says to her husband, how dare you bring this man into my house to take advantage of me, to make sport of me? And Potiphar is in a dilemma. The story implies that he doesn't really believe his wife because he would have had Joseph killed if it were true. So instead, he throws Joseph into prison. And the story seems to be going from bad to worse. Not only is he rejected from his family, not only has he tried to uphold his character, now he finds himself in a pit again. And there's no hope of getting out. Through a long series of events that we don't have time to unpack, and you can read it for yourself this week, the Pharaoh, the most powerful man in Egypt at the time, has a dream. And a former prisoner who interacted with Joseph and had a dream and translated says to Potiphar, there is somebody who can translate your dream. And so Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, after he's cleaned up, of course, and he presents himself, and Pharaoh tells Joseph his dream. And in this dream, Joseph knows what it means. It means that there's going to be 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. And so impressed is Pharaoh with this man's wisdom and his character that he puts him in charge, second in command of the most powerful empire in the world. And true enough, the famine comes. And because Joseph has been wise and used the storehouses to store food in the 7 years of plenty, the world is literally saved. One of the groups of people that needs saving is his own family and his own brothers. And so one day out of desperation, they are starving. They come to Egypt to gain some grain, to buy some grain from Pharaoh, not recognizing that it is Joseph now who is in charge of everything, and with the snap of his fingers can have them killed. What do you do? Again, when you get the opportunity to retaliate, when you get to repay a wrong for a wrong that was done to you. Well, you can become a slave and a prisoner to your bitterness, your hatred, your anger, your rage, or you can let your character define you, not your circumstance. And so Joseph, when he reveals himself, his brothers are obviously terrified. He reminds them that I'm not going to retaliate. As a matter of fact, he demonstrates the highest form of character, that I'm going to forgive you and I'm going to save you too. It's a beautiful story of redemption. It's a beautiful story of how your character can win no matter what your circumstance. It's an incredible story of forgiveness and restoration, how God can use every circumstance, no matter how desperate it seems, for good, if you choose to see it. And so this is the story of Joseph, and I hope that this week you read it. But I'd like to actually talk to you about the process, because underneath the surface story, which is really powerful all on its own, about forgiveness and grace, excuse me, is a deeper story. And it's a story of movement, of awareness. How do you move from your pain to your purpose? And I'd like to just explore that with you for a few minutes, if you'd allow me. And so we're going to see that in this story, all of us are in one of three categories of awareness or empowerment when it comes to our pain and our purpose. The first stage is what I call the stage of expectations. It's the stage where you ask, what am I? And this is the world that has been forced upon you. Now, I'm going to prove this to you. I'm here in just a second. Here's the reality. No matter where you were born, no matter what family you grew up in, no matter what culture, you were forced into a box. There were certain cultural expectations that have been enforced upon you all your life, and they define you. So maybe someone said something, maybe you were in a context where this was allowed and that wasn't allowed. And so we have we come into this world with images, contexts forced upon us. Let me give it to you this way. Okay, when I walked out today wearing this, especially these amazing red shoes. I mean, those are pretty amazing. You had a couple of reactions, and some of them were actually quite emotional. So some of you are a Raptors fan. How many Raptors fans in the place? Okay, all right, a few, all right. So you probably connected and went, wow, that's really cool. You know, you identified immediately. You like Siakam, whatever. You don't know who that is? Okay, sorry. But you identified with that and you thought, oh, that's kind of cool. Maybe you knew me. You're like, oh, yeah, that's just Bill. He's just normal. He's like one of us. And so you were connected to the story because of your context. You brought that preconceived idea into this scenario. There's others of you that did not have that reaction. You had an emotional reaction, but it was a little bit different. Maybe it's because you grew up in a very traditional church context, or maybe this is your first time in church and you're like, I had no idea what to expect, and that is definitely not it, right? And so some of you are maybe a little bit uptight. You're uptight about, the way that I'm dressed. And then here's my question to you. Where did you get this idea that that's the way the world is supposed to be? It's because you grew up in a context where pastors wear suits and ties. Now if I was going to get really biblical, I should actually be wearing a robe and a baker's hat. Like if we really want to get biblical, and I'm not going to do that because you don't want to see me in a dress. But here's the point. You come with preconceived ideas and you filter and see and perceive your world through that filter. It's true. Okay, let me prove it to you even further because I can see some of you are still a bit skeptical. All right, there is a group of people. They are called the Himba tribe. And they actually cannot see the color blue. You say, that's impossible. Everyone can see blue. No, they can't. The reason is because they don't have a word for blue. Instead, they have multiple versions of green. So they did some scientific experiment on this tribe, and here's what they showed them. Here's the scientific experiment. They showed them two circles. They first showed them the circle on the right, okay? So you can see that circle, and do you notice that one of the squares is a different color, right? What color is that? Blue. The Himba tribe, you know what they saw? No difference in color. They saw every square the same. Then they showed the Himba tribe the circle on the left. And what do you see? Every square looks the same. Not to them. The same square that you see blue on that side is actually a slightly different shade of green. They saw two colors. What you saw as two colors and one color, they saw in reverse. One color and two colors. Why? Because of your preconceived notions of the way the world should be. And here's the problem with that. We come into this world that has been forced upon us, that has tried to define you. And many of you have allowed your circumstance to define you. So you're either trying to create new experience. That's why you go on holidays, vacations, you post all those beautiful pictures on Instagram. You're trying to create new experiences because you're trying to shed the old experiences. But the truth is that if you let your circumstance define you, you will consistently be frustrated because the world will tell you a lie. In this story, Joseph is first told that he's just a shepherd. Not only is he a shepherd, he's the 11th son. He's completely insignificant. So when he comes with a new idea that no one's thought of before, I could be a leader, I could be used for something great, his brothers go, you're an idiot. Because it doesn't fit in their preconceived box of the way the world is supposed to be. And then he's a slave. The world tries to tell him that's all you are. You are there to serve your master. Shut up and do your job. But he doesn't. He sees what no one else sees. He sees character, and he sees the opportunity to lead even at that. And then the world tries to define him as a prisoner. You get my drift. So how has the world tried to describe you? For me, and many of you have heard my story before, there's lots of ways the world tried to describe me. One was stupid, right? I had a teacher in her infinite wisdom who decided to tell me that, and she had a lot of evidence to prove it. But my point is this. I wasn't stupid. It was this world that forced me into a certain way of thinking, and just the way my brain works, it doesn't work like most people's brains. So I did not do well in school. It wasn't until after high school where I was allowed to think, instead of just regurgitate information, that I actually excelled. I went from barely passing high school, literally, to graduating with a master's degree in highest honors. Why? Is that because I'm amazing? No. It's because this world will try to force you into a box and try to tell you who you are or what you should be. Whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's the media, you are bombarded every day with what you are supposed to be. And it's the most limiting way of existing because you just conform. You just accept it. You embrace it. This is just the way it is. But what if it isn't? What if you just can't see the greatness in you? What if you need God to step in as he did for Joseph and say, no, there's something so much more than you. There's something greater in you. It doesn't matter what your family says about you. It doesn't matter the mistakes that you have made. There is something great inside of you, and this is the first step towards taking your pain and moving it into purpose. For your pain does not need to define you. Is it fair? No. Is it right? No. Should it have happened? No. But you don't have to be stuck there. You don't have to stay a slave, and you don't have to stay in prison. So how do you break out of that? Here, what you do is, the first step in my mind is you have to refuse to be defined by the limitations you are given. So can I ask you a question? Are you going to allow your experiences to define you? Or are you going to dig deeper and be who you were created to be, regardless of your circumstance? That's the first step to maturity. The next step is reflection. So just like we live in expectation, the next step is reflection. And where in the first case you ask the question, what am I? Because of everything that's been inputted into you, this next step goes inside and says, who am I? Who am I really? It's the world you choose to see. In chapter 39, verse 2, it says this really interesting phrase 2 times in this story in the Bible. When he's in slave first and then he's in prison, the Bible says, and the Lord was with him, and he prospered. This is a really interesting phrase because I don't know what it's like for you when you're in a bad space. I don't know what you think when life has been unfair and you've been mistreated. I don't think most of us go, yeah, God's with me, right? Most of us ask the opposite question, God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you left me? And yet Joseph seemed to have a perspective that there was something inside of him that was greater than his circumstance. And because of it, he prospered. See, he never allowed himself to be defined by his circumstance. He always was defined by the dream that God had given him. And it's the world you choose to make. See, in the first case, you just embrace the world as it happens to you, life as it happens to you, the world that is forced upon you. But in this one, you get to choose. You get to make a choice. Have you ever met somebody who does this? These are really powerful people. My wife is one of these people. Now, no offense to all the ladies in the audience today. You're all very beautiful. But my wife is the most beautiful woman on the planet. I mean, that's just the way it is. It's just a fact. It's okay. We all have our preferences. You know, you see blue, I see green. But she is the most beautiful person on the planet. And there's a reason for this in my mind. Because she's one of the most positive people I've ever met. My wife is ridiculously positive. I mean, she actually can be annoyingly positive. And here's what I mean by that. You'll wake up and it's raining, pouring, and she'll look outside and go, oh, it's going to be a great day. And I'm thinking, no, it's not. Let me wallow in my misery. But she doesn't let me because she has chosen to see the world differently. And here's what happens when you understand the power of your perspective. You get to create. It's incredibly powerful. And here's what happens. All things work together for good. Why? Because you see the good in everything. And if you look for it, you find it. That's the simple reality. And so, if you allow your life to be defined by the things that have happened to you, that is who you become. I can tell instantly when I meet somebody how they've allowed themselves to be defined. And it's often rooted in some past story. This happened to me. This is what I was told. This is what the world is like. And I'll never be anything different. But true greatness starts when you begin to believe that actually something is inside of you that just needs to be drawn out. And that your character can shine no matter what your circumstance. And you get to make the best of what happens to you. Have you ever used Post-it notes? You know what I'm talking about, right? Those little sheets of paper that you can stick on things. Like they're great for notes on fridges or in notebooks, right? Because you can easily peel them off. You stick them in, they don't stick, they peel off. Do you know that those are an epic failure? That the guy who actually designed those in 1968 was trying to make a really strong adhesive. He was trying to make the best glue that has ever been created, and that's what we got. And so instead of getting frustrated about it, he realized, man, when I stick these things, I can easily pull it off and stick it again. He turned it into something really positive. He said, this is great. And he created Post-it notes and made a lot of money. How many people love potato chips? Okay, in the late 1800s in a restaurant, this is the legend, and probably true. This restaurant served sliced potatoes that were fried. The problem is they were really thick and really chunky, and so one really obstinate client or person at the restaurants kept complaining that they were too thick and too soggy. 4 times that was sent back, that dish. Finally, the chef had enough. And to make a point, he barely shaved the potatoes. He over-fried them, put some salt on them, and voila, potato chips. You see, my point is this. Life happens, but you can let it happen to you, or you can leverage it to be you, who you were really designed to be. And you get to turn your obstacle into an opportunity. So let me ask that first question again. Are you letting an experience define you? And if so, why? Who are you really? And if you've actually never stopped and thought about it, maybe you should this week at some point. Just take some time to think about that. The second question I have is, have these experiences actually revealed something better? Have you used them as an opportunity to draw something out, like an anvil pounding away at steel? Is there an opportunity for something greater to be revealed in you and through you? Can I just give you some ways this has worked in my life. I once worked in a work environment that was highly toxic. It was actually really bad. Every day I was told how I was not good enough. Every day I was reminded that I wasn't meeting objectives and goals. Every day I felt like a failure. And it was really hard. And I was tempted many times in that journey to believe the lie that was being told, that I wasn't good enough, I couldn't do this job, I was never going to be successful, whatever it was. And I had to make a decision. Was that true? Or was there something better? And I chose the something better. And here's what I learned from it. You say, well, what can you take away from that? I just determined that I was never going to be a boss like that. That's what I took away from that. That I was never going to I vowed to do my best to never make people feel like that. Now, of course, it's not always easy because everyone has their own story, but that's what I determined. I remember when I hit a really low point, I've always wanted to be a really great dad, and I've always wanted to be a really great husband. And I had every opportunity because it was modeled to me. But early on in my marriage and as a dad really early, I realized, man, I've got some major flaws. And I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision if I was going to be defined by that, because I justified it at first, especially my anger. Well, I'm okay to be angry because of this and that. And I blamed it because I believed I was a victim to my circumstance. Life was outside of my control, and so I was raging against the system. Or I had to make a choice to change what I saw and what I believed. And you have that power too. So what circumstance have you allowed to define you? And is there a way possibly to leverage that into something greater? Which leads me to my third and final step in awareness and turning your pain into purpose. And it's what I call anticipation. You see, the first stage is just accepting the world that's been forced upon you. And so many of us do. The reason you're swimming downstream is because it's all you know. You've never thought about anything else. But there's something more in you. The second stage is when you actually start to choose. It's the world you choose to see. It's the world you choose through perspective to believe. And this is where God comes in and reminds you that something could be better. And then the third is the world you make. This is where you become a world changer, where you move from what am I to who am I to why am I. The last statement in Joseph's story is really powerful. In chapter 50, verse 20, it says, here's his response to his brothers. After all they've done to him, after all he's had to go through, because it took, by the way, from 17 to 30 years old, there was a 13-year period where he didn't know how this was going to work out. And when he has the opportunity to retaliate, here's what he says: you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. See, in the first case, you let life happen to you. In the second case, you make the best of what happens to you. But here's where the real power comes. Here's where the real purpose is. This is where you make the best life happen. So early on in Joseph's life, he doesn't know why he's a leader. He thinks that so he can lord it over his brothers, and that doesn't turn out very well. But when he realizes that it's to serve others, that is the greatest and highest form of purpose, that there's something inside of you and it's in there for a reason. And I don't know what you believe about where you are right now. Maybe you came here from another country and you're wondering, why am I in this really cold country? Or why am I here in this place where I'm unfamiliar? Or maybe you've lived here all of your life and you've been dreaming how you're going to get out. Or maybe you're here in a situation, a circumstance that you didn't ask for. Maybe something happened to you along the way that wasn't of your own choosing. Or maybe you're in a spot because you made choices and now you have to live in the consequences. In all of these situations, you could see yourself as a slave or a prisoner or as something else, something powerful. By asking the question, why am I here? So for me, I learned empathy through the painful experiences in my life. So when someone comes into my office and tells a heart-wrenching story, even though I can't fully understand because no two stories are the same, I can have incredible grace and mercy because I know what it's like to be rejected. I know what it's like to be slandered. I know what it's like to be taken advantage of, lied to, betrayed, lonely. I've allowed those circumstances not to define me, but to use them as a launching pad into purpose, to sit with someone and go, man, I feel your pain. I'm walking with you. I don't fully understand it. I can't, but I am walking with you. Or when it comes to grace, people think I'm far too gracious, which I'll take that as an insult any day. The reason I'm gracious is because I've needed a lot of grace. You see, when you make a lot of mistakes and you realize, man, you need grace, it's really hard to be judgmental and condemn others. When you realize how much you need grace, you give it away freely. It's nothing you have to manufacture or work. It comes naturally because you understand through your circumstance. It doesn't define me, but I can leverage it towards purpose. So do you know why you are where you are? Do you know why you work where you work? Do you know why you go to school where you go to school? Do you know why you live in that house, or why God put you in that family, as beautiful and dysfunctional as it is? If you don't know the answer to those questions, you'll have no purpose. You'll just get frustrated. You'll start punching the clock, making the most of it, sucking it up, enduring, letting the world happen to you instead of actually being proactive and making the world the place it could be. What if tomorrow morning when you woke up and you went to school, you actually went to school on a mission to make the world better? What if you went to that workplace and started opening your eyes to see the possibility around you? How could I make this space a better space? What if you drove home today to your neighborhood and thought to yourself, how could I make this neighborhood the place that God could make it? What if you turned your pain and instead of being defined by it, used it as a launching pad into purpose, into something greater? I think, personally, that it would change the world. The truth is that Joseph is a hero. Simply because he refused to let his circumstance define him. Instead, he allowed his character to shine through, so much so that other people saw it in him. Potiphar saw it in him. You're a leader. The jailer saw it in him, put him in charge of the whole jail. You're a leader. And finally, Pharaoh saw it in him. And so God sees something in you. And you may not believe it yet. Maybe this is your first time here and you're like, wow, this is really intense. Yeah, it's really intense because you were supposed to be here. And the reason that your heart is beating and the reason you're racing is because there's something that's trying to be drawn out of you. Don't let your circumstance define you. Let your character, who God made you to be, shine through. And so in this story, we learn that life is whatever you make it. So make it great. Life is whatever you make it. So make it great. So 3 closing thoughts for you as you leave today. If you're here and you feel like you're stuck in what has happened to you, you've become defined by your circumstance, maybe you need to change it. Maybe you need to change the question. And not why did this happen to me, but rather why or how can I use this for something greater? Second thought is, maybe you believe that something is great inside of you, but it isn't happening, and you're getting frustrated, and you feel like you're banging your head against the cement ceiling, the concrete ceiling between you and God. Can I just encourage you to keep going? It took 13 years for Joseph. For some of us, it's going to take 30, 40, 60, but your character will win the day. And then the third thought is, do you really know who you are? And if you do, are you using that to serve others? Because that's where true purpose lies. And so Joseph ends this story by saying, these circumstances were intended to harm me, but I refuse to let them harm me because God intended them for good, that I might save many. And that's what you are called to as well. And so God, thank you for this reminder. It's, for many of us, hard because we live in a culture that likes to define us by the things that have happened to us or by the things that we have done. Maybe a mistake we made years ago that people have kept us in a prison over. Maybe something that was done to us that we didn't ask for, and so we feel like we're a slave. And so we've allowed ourselves to be defined by what this world says is right or wrong, good or bad. We've allowed our circumstances to bully us around and push us around. But my prayer is that today you would give us your power and the courage to believe that we are not defined by our circumstances. Yes, things happen. Things that shouldn't happen sometimes. Things that others have done and things that we have done. And there's regret and shame, but those things do not need to keep us enslaved. There is a truth that we can be who you created us to be. So help us to rise up out of our circumstance and to discover who we really are. There's something inside of us that's just screaming to come out. And when we realize that, remind us that the reason for that is that we can make this world a better place. The world you envisioned it could be. So give us your power to be all that we were created to be, so that we can make this world the place you designed it to be. I ask in Jesus' name. Amen. If you're here today and you'd like to talk to somebody, we'd love to meet you at the Great Big Blue Wall. If you have any questions about anything, or maybe even just what the next step could be, if you're watching online, again, you can just interact with our online pastor, and we will be more than happy to direct you to next step. Maybe this week, all you're going to do is just read the story again and allow God to speak through the story. Maybe you've never read the Bible before. Now's a great time to start and ask yourself, where am I in this story, and what does it mean for me? And so here is what I bless you with. This is true, that life doesn't always go the way that we want. But we do not need to let the things that happen to us limit us or hold us down. That we are not defined by our circumstances. That there is something greater. And if we tap into that and we allow that thing inside of us, the dream that God has given us, to emerge so that we can serve others, that's where greatness lies. So may you be great. Even if it means you impact one person and make this world a better place by influencing them for good. And so I bless you today. Be a world changer. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Looking at my life, every low and every high, let me count the ways you've shown up in perfect time. Every minute that you've given, every promise you provide, you won't leave my side.